Successful and write-in campaign are concepts that don't usually go together in politics, but that was the case last week in the race for the Hampshire, Franklin, and Worcester District State Senate seat. Joe Comerford, a former MoveOn.org campaign director, defeated Chelsea Klein, the only candidate actually on the ballot, and two other write-in candidates. It was the latest plot twist in what has been a turbulent time following the resignation of longtime Senator Stanley Rosenberg. Comerford emerged with 54% of the vote.
What we expected was to run the best people-powered grassroots campaign we could, but that margin of victory we didn't anticipate.
And there was so much back and forth right before the election saying, oh, it could be a day or so. There are so many write-in candidates in this race. And also then there was some concern, like, are stickers too big? Are people going to spell names right? So I think lots of anxiety in the general public. How are you dealing with that in advance of the election?
Yeah, it's a good question. Our main hope was to make sure that the constituents, the folks who were supporting our campaign, felt like they could enter the polls with a modicum of confidence, that their vote mattered, right? Their vote would count. And there was, you're right, there was a fair bit of anxiety. It had to do with the stickers and stickers versus write-in. It had to do with the fact that there were two different ballots in the district. So some cities, towns actually, had paper ballots. Others had what we called scanned ballots, which were the larger ballots that went through machines. And they looked very different. Yeah. And we didn't know they were going to look that different until, actually less than 2 weeks before.
So part of it is voter education. And then, so it's almost like as a write-in candidate that you're running two campaigns, the general name awareness campaign that I think any candidate issues campaign that any candidate needs to run. And then also these rules of here's how you actually vote for me, right?
Sure, yeah. It was a bit of voter education, right? I like to say when I was out at house parties or at public events, in the United States right now, Americans, right, we've lost in some ways, the understanding that our vote matters, that the most powerful thing we have in this country is our ability to vote in people to represent our best interests, to work in the best interests of everyone, not just a few people, right? That's the power of our democracy. So we've lost that a little bit. That's part of what we hope to do. All of us who are seeking elected office is bump out the barriers to voting and make sure that the largest, most diverse cohort of people possible get to the polls every election day. That's the best, healthiest democracy we can get in this country. But then on top of that, we had to actually help people understand that, yes, a write-in candidate can be viable, and yes, it's possible to write in without any difficulty.
And so you've clearly convinced voters of that. You are on your way to represent this district in the Senate, barring someone else coming forward before the general election and mounting a successful write-in campaign themselves. But for you, looking ahead, what's the biggest challenge that you see for the Hampshire, Franklin, Worcester Senate District?
Well, it's not necessarily a challenge, but we are in the midst of a sea change, right? We have an entirely outgoing delegation in the Hampshire, Franklin, Worcester State Senate District, in terms of 4 representatives and a senator.
For broader Western Massachusetts.
For broader Western Massachusetts. And so we have a sea change happening. We have 2 representatives as part of the district, actually, Paul Mark and Susanna Whips. They're ably serving. They're going to continue. But then, we're turning over 4 representatives. That's quite an extraordinary turnover.
Western Massachusetts, that's really unprecedented.
Plus a senator. And so that's not necessarily a challenge, but it is something to both look at in terms of the kind of work that has to be done, the kind of groundwork that needs to be laid, and then also the kind of opportunity we're facing now.
So let's look at possible, like you said, maybe not a challenge, but something different that people need to think about is the change of leadership. Stanley Rosenberg, who held the seat before he resigned, was Senate president. We have a number of key committee positions that will be lost as people are moving forward. So do you think that voters are concerned that there's this loss of power, this loss of leadership that Western Massachusetts won't have starting January?
I don't know that concern is the right word. Certainly aware. Everywhere I went during the campaign, people were cognizant. They were aware that we had lost a lot of footing, or were going to lose a lot of footing in this district. And so the questions were a lot about, hey, who can hit the ground running for us in Boston? We want to make sure that our region, our schools, our public transportation, our healthcare, our environmental priorities are all in good hands with folks who, yes, we will all be new when we hit the House and the Senate, but who can pick up the baton from this outgoing delegation and move it forward.
So for you as a senator, or most likely to become senator in January, Stanley Rosenberg, when he resigned his seat, it was amid a scandal, an ethics investigation which found no wrongdoing in his part, but did find a significant lack of judgment and leadership in his role. Do you, or have you looked at the Senate rules, or do you intend to review the Senate rules and say, does there need to be additional protections for people so that they can't be sexually harassed in this way or feel vulnerable again?
Sure. I think there are a lot of people in both the House and the Senate who are going to want to renew a look at rules to ensure the best protection we can offer our staff and ourselves, as members of this body. So I think that's something that will be forthcoming, as well as other legislative priorities that weren't actually finished in this last session that need to be taken up immediately.
Have you spoken with the former senator yet, or do you intend to look at some of those priorities and say, look, what was on the table, what was unfinished business for you?
Sure, I have spoken with Senator Rosenberg. We plan to meet actually in a couple of weeks because I do want to know what was on his docket, on his desk, his proverbial desk, so that I can best move it forward, because I think that would be both a way to honor the work that he had led in this district for so long and also a way to make sure that there aren't any loose threads in this next chapter.
For you, most recently, you're known to people in the district, whether it's your work at National Priorities Project or before that, the Western Mass Food Bank, most recently for MoveOn. And MoveOn in particular has a lot of progressive street cred, which I think is something that people in this district have latched onto. But moving into the general election, are you concerned that maybe it's a liability because it's so niche?
MoveOn?
Having worked for MoveOn.org, and the fact that so many, it's seen as such a progressive organization.
I thought you said another word. That's so funny. No, I think one of the things that I demonstrated during the campaign is that I want to be a senator for everybody. Yes, I have my own values, and they're going to be important to me. But a senator, I think, situates herself with her own sets of values and priorities and abilities and background and skill, and then deeply roots in a community, right? Because a senator doesn't get elected just to represent people who are going to agree with her on everything. In fact, she gets to represent everybody. And so it would be wrong of me to imagine that I would really entrench in that kind of my own values, my own priorities solely, and then, actually not represent fully the entire district. And I intend to represent the entire district. So I think I proved that to folks. When I was out on the campaign trail, speaking with them, fielding their questions, speaking honestly, asking my own questions. And that's what I'm going to continue to do.